Wednesday Wanderers, it's Ranger Erin again, and we're going to be talking today about science. So we talk about science all the time, we're learning about science, but sometimes it's nice to just take a moment and be like, wait a second, what do we really mean when we're talking about science? So science is just how we get our knowledge. That's how we get our know-how in the world. And science, the type of knowledge that we get from science is given to us when we follow the scientific method. So the scientific method is going to allow us to explore the world and do experiments and figure out what's going on out here in a way that's really going to give us some good answers. So I've broken down our scientific method into 6 easy steps, and we're going to go through each one of them. The way that we really start the scientific method is just by wondering about the world. So that's sort of what we do here in Wednesday Wonders, is wonder, and we look and observe closely. So you're going to just sort of walk through the world and you're going to be like, hey, I noticed something, and it's going to catch your interest. So when you make an observation, it's really you're just noticing that thing that interests you. Once you've noticed some things, you've made some observations, you can start to ask some questions about those observations. So I have been noticing a lot that we've got a lot of pollinators, lots of bees and butterflies out in the prairie, but I don't notice as many bugs in the forest. So maybe this is where I'm starting with my observation, and now I can ask the question of, are there more bugs in the prairie or are there more bugs in the forest? So this is just an example of that scientific process, but it could be anything. So you make that observation and then we're going to start asking questions. After you've got your question, you're going to take everything that you know and you're going to make the best guess that you can. That's what a hypothesis is going to be. You're going to make the best guess that you can. So my example question is, are there more bugs in the forest or are there more bugs in the prairie? So now I'm going to make that hypothesis, and remember what my observation was, is I noticed that there were lots and lots of bugs that were out in our prairie going all over those beautiful flowers pollinating. So my hypothesis is going to be based on my observation, and it's going to be that I think that there's more bugs that are out in the prairie than there are in the forest. But this is just the start of our questioning, our making a question, and then we are going to make that hypothesis. So now I've got a hypothesis. Next up, this is going to be the trickiest step. You're going to make an experiment. So I have made the observation, I've made a question, and now I've got to figure out how I'm going to answer this question of whether or not I think that there's more bugs in the forest or in the prairie. So I'm going to make an experiment. So I could put down a hula hoop on the ground in the prairie and count all of the different types of bugs that I find in there, and then take that same hula hoop into the forest and count all of the different bugs that I find there. So that could be my experiment, and that's going to be able to answer the question that I started with. But anytime you're going to be making an experiment, you have to ask yourself the questions of, can I answer this question? Do I have the resources? So do I have the stuff to do it? If this question that you asked is so big that you need lots and lots of money and lots of supplies, it's probably not the right one for you to be doing right now. Maybe that's one to save for later on. Another question is it safe? Can I safely do this experiment? We don't want to do anything that's really going to put ourselves in harm. And then that last one that we're going to ask is it kind, is it respectful? So we're not going to do anything that's going to harm these animals out here or harm somebody else's yard or anything like that. So we're going to be respectful about our experiments too. After you have made your experiment, you've counted all of your bugs in my example, you are going to figure out what did your experiment tell you, right? So that's just what it means to make those conclusions, is that you're going to look at the number of bugs in my example that you found in the prairie, or how many bugs you found in the forest, and you're going to start to decide, was I right or was I wrong? Were there more bugs in one? Were there more bugs in the other? Were they the same exact number? You're going to figure out what happened in your experiment. What did you find out? When we draw conclusions, we always have to be prepared to be wrong. It's actually one of the things that I love about science, is that science loves mistakes. So it is fine to have made the wrong hypothesis in the beginning. It's kind of nice to be surprised by what you found out. So science really loves mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You just have to start to be aware and sort of, say, yeah, I was wrong. And this is kind of cool that we found out something new. Our last step, reporting our results, is really important because science is all about community. So we don't just do science alone. It's really important that when we come up with our answers that we found in our experiment, we share it with other scientists so that they can take a look at it and they can build on it, or they can say, you know what, I think that we made a mistake here. We need to redo it in this way, and we're going to get better, more stronger results. So that way we're going to have good, hard science. For your hike, we're going to go through the first 2 steps of the scientific method. So we're going to go on what we call an idea hike. You're going to walk through the forest, through the creek, wherever you want to go, and you're going to just make some observations. And you're just going to notice whatever it is that you notice around you. It might be your sight. You might see something. You might hear something. It might be something that reminds you of something that you've seen before. So you can draw on your past observations as well. And you're just going to write down all of the things that you are observing on your hike. And once you get finished with that, we're going to go back and we're going to make a question for each one of those. On my idea hike, I made a number of different observations. And in this column, I wrote all of those observations down. And on this column over here, this is where I made the question about each one of those observations, so our first 2 steps of that scientific method. So I started off with that example question. The observation was that I saw lots and lots of bugs out in the prairie, and I made that question of, are there more bugs in the prairie or in the forest? I also noticed recently that I've seen lots and lots of tiny crayfish in still pools. So my question for that one would be, when do crayfish hatch? Another one that I've noticed is that I hear a lot of bird calls in the morning, but I don't really hear a whole lot of them in the afternoon. So my question that I made is, when do birds make the most calls during the day? When you're making those questions, you're going to think about those keywords: who, what, where, when, how, or why. And those are going to be a good start to any question to get you started in that scientific method. Thanks for joining me this week. If you have any questions, if you came up with a great idea, but you just don't know how to make the experiment, you are welcome to contact me, and I will help you put together your experiment. It's a really great exercise.